Hello everybody, this is Benny Hills, and today we have a little bit of a special video, but before that I have a quick announcement, well two I guess. First of all, I'm in a different setting, as you may have noticed. I'm at my parents' house in Northampton right now, so that's pretty fun. I'm here for a little bit. I'm going to go back to my normal place in Cambridge soon, but then I'll be back here for most of December, so I'll be filming a lot here. Secondly, I passed my actuarial exam today. I'm very excited about this. I'm sorry for the relative lack of content over the last couple weeks. I've been just studying a ton for this test. I took a brief break to try and record some Vintage Cube videos. Really, that was just over my birthday weekend. I recorded a bunch. But then in the last couple weeks, I've just not played at all. So I've just been studying. Passed the test, which I'm very happy about. I honestly started irresponsibly late and had to really cram, but managed to get there and pass the test. So very, very happy about that. Yeah, if there's anyone that knows about the actuarial world, I'm happy to talk about that in the comments. But for those of you who don't know, it's just a test that you have to study for like a million hours for, and I did that, and I passed. So, good news. Now we can get back to Magic. There's no Vintage Cube for a little bit, but it will be coming out soon, so I'm looking forward to that. But we're still doing a Vintage Cube themed video today. I'm going to be talking about the changes in this iteration of the cube. To the best of my knowledge, they're not making any more changes between this iteration and the one that will be out in a couple weeks, so this will still go for the ones you'll be seeing soon on my channel and elsewhere. So the format of this is I'm going to go through every single change and talk about the card that they cut and the card that they added and how they compare and give that a grade. And then at the end, I'll go through top 3 best additions and top 3 worst cuts. So if you really don't have much time or just want to see the highlights, you can skip to the end and I'll talk about those 3 for both sides. But before that, I'm going to go through each change individually and talk about the cards in a little bit more detail and sort of see the hits, the misses, the B pluses, the Fs, the As. Yeah, so we'll dive right on in. I'm just going to go through the changes in the order that they're listed on the Wizards website, so no particular order. But yeah, so we'll dive right on in. First of all is a terrible, terrible change. Overall, I like most of these. C is neutral for me. So, maybe you think a B minus isn't the greatest grade if you get it on a test or something. But for this, B minus is an improvement. I mean, obviously, an A is the best improvement, but anything like even a C plus is like a net positive change that I'm happy they made. So keep that in context throughout. With that being said, first change, hard F, Mystic Confluence for commit memory. This is just a terrible exchange, and I think they did it because there was a bug. I mean, I've played Mystic Confluence many times on Magic Online, and there was never a bug before, and then all of a sudden there was a bug this iteration, so I don't really know how that happened. And even with the bug, I would still rather Mystic Confluence. I mean, in my experience, there's sometimes it wouldn't let you draw 3 cards. Like, you could only draw 2 cards and then do another mode. Even with that, I would much rather that than Commit Memory. Commit Memory is a good card. Like, I am not sad to see that card in the cube, but Mystic Confluence was one of my favorite cards. Super powerful, super skill testing, really interesting, just gives you a lot of options. That was honestly one of my top 10 cards in the cube in terms of how much I enjoyed it as a card. So I'm really, really sad to see it go. Again, no problem with the card commit memory. I mean, I guess considering the bug, I guess I could give it a C, because if they're going to add a card, that's a good choice. But come on, Wizards, get your act together. This card is too good to not play. Whoever designed this card and now doesn't get to see being played in Vintage Cube deserves to be upset about this. And everyone that wanted to play it and now can't deserves to be upset as well. So that's an F. Really bad change in my opinion. I hope they get that back. But yeah. Moving on, next up we have Brightling. Came out for Spirit of the Labyrinth. This is a good change. A B plus, I would say. Brightling is a good card. I actually think it was a little bit underrated. I really liked picking it up in control decks as sort of a win condition in certain matchups where it's basically unkillable and then a nice lifelink threat. So it was a last pick a lot, and that's fair. It's definitely not one of the best cards in the cube. But I'm a little sad to see it go. But Spirit of the Labyrinth is great. Any card that's cheap in white that hits for more power than its mana cost, this 3 power 2-drop is going to be a good card. And then the text on Spirit of the Labyrinth is genuinely great in this format. I mean, Narset, Part of Veils, has a similar text of only letting your opponents draw 1 card, and that's just really, really strong. So overall, this card is just great. Super, super happy it's in the format. It went from not being in the format to being one of the best 2-drops in my opinion. White Weenie was already good, so yeah, just a great addition to an already good deck. Next up, we have another change for White Weenie. Hallowed Spirit Keeper coming out for Vryn Wingmare. And this is another good change. B, a solid B. I liked Hallowed Spirit Keeper a little bit more than Brightling. That's another card that I think was underrated by a bunch of people. I mean, it just Comes down for pretty cheap, hits sort of hard, and then makes an army when it dies. It gives you nice insurance against board sweepers, which can really wreck mono white a lot of the time. So Hallowed Spirit Keeper was good, but Verdant Wing Mirror is very strong. It's a lot worse than Thalia because 3 mana is more than 2 mana, and the sort of like early game taxing effect is one that doesn't scale very well. I mean, like a 6-drop with Thalia's ability would be basically just as good as a 6-drop without that ability, but on a 2-drop it's great, and on a 3-drop it's good. Some people think Verdant Wing Mirror is one of the best white cards. I saw LSV in a video was talking about how that was like one of the best cards in the color, and that I think is just not true. Like, I mean, yeah, I just don't agree with that. I think Verdant Wing Mirror is like pretty replaceable, but still good. Like, I'm still happy to see this change, so solid B. Next up, Amiria Angel came out for Eidolon of Obstruction. Another upgrade, B- on this one. Amiria Angel was another one that I think was solidly playable. There's a lot of matchups, in particular against green decks, where you really want to have a lot of flyers in mono white, and they lost a couple flyers, including Amiria Angel, so that is a slight loss, but still a positive change overall. Eidolon of Obstruction isn't great, but you want to fill out your curve pretty well, and just, a nice card that you can play on turn 1 with a Mox, or just turn 2 and beat down, and the ability is occasionally pretty nice, especially, like, Planeswalker heavy control decks are probably the hardest matchup for mono white, or at least one of them if they have good removal, so having nice text against that is good. Next up is one of my favorite additions, Skyclave Apparition, which replaced Fairgrounds Warden, and this is just a strict upgrade. Fairgrounds Warden was good. I played it in my mono white decks, and I was pretty happy with it. The interaction with Containment Priest was cool, and we're losing that now since Skyclave Apparition already exiles permanently, but this is a huge upgrade. Skyclave Apparition is just very, very good. The fact that it can hit Planeswalkers, it can hit Artifact mana, it can hit, like, problematic enchantments. It's just really, really a good card. So super, super happy to see this as an addition. It's good in control decks and mid-range decks and aggressive decks. It's just a really nice addition to the cube. And it makes sense to count Fairgrounds Warden. Well, that's not like... There's probably 3-drops that are worse than Fairgrounds Warden, including the 2 3-drops I just talked about, Brightling and Hallowed Spirit Keeper. Like, it's pretty similar. It overlaps a lot with Skyclave Apparition, so I think there's a good change. Next up, Angel of Serenity was cut for Amiria's Call, and this is another very positive change. I'll give this one a B+. Amiria's Call, so they added this cycle of lands that can be cast as spells too. They did not add the blue one, but they added the rest, which makes sense, I guess. I mean, the blue, there's a high bar you have to clear to be a blue card in this format. But I think this is a good change. Angel of Serenity was pretty much unplayable. That was actually one of my least favorite cards in the whole format. It's like pretty much uncastable for an aggressive deck, or you would just never play it in an aggressive deck. It's pretty lackluster in control. You don't really want your 7-drop to just like deal with some creatures. And it's also not even a great Reanimator target. I mean, it's fine. I've played it in Reanimator before, at least out of the board, but like it's definitely not a card you're excited about. And Amiria's Call is good. I mean, like in blue-white control, it's a nice, like, you want to play at least 17.5 lands usually, so this lets you play an 18th land without risking flooding out. So it's not like a great card, but I think B+ is fair for this. It's a nice addition. Next up, Enlightened Tutor has been replaced by Lapse of Certainty. And this is a C-, honestly. Like, Lapse of Certainty is fine. It can be okay in, like, a blue-white control deck that's light on counter magic, and there's matchups where you want, like, if you're playing against a deck with board sweepers, it can be a really nice, like, put it on top of their library, stall for 1 turn to get it in your last attack for the win. So I do think Lapse of Certainty is playable, but 3 mana is a lot for a counterspell, especially in a color that's usually trying to be low to the ground. I think Mana Tithe is much, much better than Lapse of Certainty. And Enlightened Tutor is actually cool. Like, it's really sweet with stuff like Soul Ring. Yeah, I just think Enlightened Tutor is a cool card. Interesting, gives you cool deck building decisions, really good with balance. So, yeah, I'm pretty sad to see this change. Like, it's not a disaster, which is why it's a C- instead of something like a D. Because I do think Lapse of Certainty has applications, and I like colors getting off-brand effects. Like, the fact that white has access to 2 counterspells now I think is sort of fun. But I would prefer to not see this change, to be honest. Or if you're gonna bring in Lapse of Certainty, cut something else. Next up, another change that I'm neutral on the best. Actually, a card that played well with Enlightened Tutor. Moat has been replaced by Felidar Retreat. And this is, I'll give it a C. I don't think it's bad, but I don't think it's a huge upgrade. Moat was really, really good in some decks. I might be a little biased because those decks were often blue-white control, which I do like quite a bit. I can understand why people would think, it's pretty frustrating to play against for some decks. There's a lot of decks that just, literally can't beat it no matter what they do. And so I can understand not wanting that effect on a 4-mana card. But I also sort of think that, like, that happens in Vintage Cube. You're not really playing this format to have all fair things happen. You sort of have to accept that sometimes you'll lose to one card. So I think Moat had an interesting role, and Felidar Retreat's pretty bad. Like, you don't want it in aggressive decks because you're not trying to keep hitting land drops after 4. You want your 4 drops to, like, do something really good right then. And, like, it does have somewhat cool applications in some, like, landfally decks. Like, if you have Knight of the Reliquary and you can, like, loop fetch lands and stuff. I mean, if you have fast bond, you can really go off with it. And they can generate a lot of power quickly. I mean, this is best case scenario, obviously, but if you go like turn 4 or like turn 5, play that fetch land. Next turn, another fetch land. You can hit with 2 4/4s. So like it can generate a lot of power quickly, but that's best case scenario. And a lot of times you'll just have it and not enough lands, so it's not the best card. Next up, Spear of Heliod has been replaced by Fighters 1. I'll give that a C+. Fighters 1 is like, I've actually never played with that card. I'm sure I will. I think it is actually a nice piece for some mono white decks. Like, this is definitely not a format for combat tricks in general, but Fighters 1 is a pretty good one, and the fact that it can sort of protect you from board sweepers is nice. So, I'm interested to see how it plays. I might play with it and find that it's pretty underwhelming, in which case I might be sad about this change, but for now I'm happy. Spirit of Heliod is fine. I do think Anthem effects are pretty nice in mono white. Like, having 1 is good, and if they cut Honor of the Pure, I'd be pretty upset. But they don't need to go overboard with this effect, so I'm okay with this change. Modest upgrade, I would say. Next up, Terminus has been replaced by Oust, and that's a solid B. I'm happy with this change. Terminus was usually a little underwhelming. If you have the perfect setup where you have like multiple cheap cantrips to set it up and Brainstorm and Jace the Mind Sculptor, you could do cool things with that, since it's Divining Top, but usually it was just a pretty overcosted Wrath. So Terminus was not great, and Oust is genuinely a very good card. Cheap spot removal that doesn't care about like what you're removing is really nice. I mean, nothing feels better than your opponent going like turn 1, land, Mana Crypt, Tinker, get a Blightsteel Colossus, and you just go like, nice Blightsteel, bro, Plains, Oust. So it's a good addition. It's like not the best in white aggressive decks because the life gain does actually matter, but really good in white control decks or blue-white again. And good in some mono white situations. It's very good against like turn 1 Llanowar Elves out of green decks, so I'm happy to see Oust be in the cube. Next up, Jace Beleren has given way to Jace Mirror Mage. And this is an upgrade, I would say. I'll give it a B. Jace Beleren is, I mean, it's good, I guess. It draws cards. Drawing cards is always nice, but there's not that many interesting decisions with it. It's like you just play it and then draw a card, and the next turn draw another card. And in general, I prefer Planeswalkers to have a little bit more nuance to them. And Jace Mirror Mage, I think, does a really good job of having a similar overall impact of just like being a source of raw card advantage, but giving you a lot more decisions and sort of like inflection points. Like, do you wait to kick it? Do you like risk letting it die? How valuable is the scry? So I actually, I like this card a lot. It's a little slow, and there's definitely matchups where it's quite bad, but it's a cool card. I think it's better than Jace Beleren. I might prefer Jace Architect of Thought, but it's actually overperformed at the times I've played it. If you do have 5 mana and play it, it's actually really good. Like, just coming down and scrying and then drawing a card and then letting you draw 2 cards next turn is pretty good, and just like creating 2 bodies or 2 Planeswalkers can be hard for your opponent to deal with effectively, so this is a nice addition. Next up, we've gotten Seagate Stormcaller instead of Search for Azcanta. Oh, I guess one thing I'll note is that, like, they say these cards are replacing the other. I mean, technically, you could think of Search for Azcanta as being replaced by Jace Mirror Mage and Jace Beleren as being replaced by Seagate Stormcaller. I'm just going with what they say. But in each sort of discussion, I'm talking about each of the cards on their own, so you can sort of see generally how I feel about all of these. Definitely let me know in the comments if you think I missed any, or if there's cards that have over or underperformed for you. But I think this is a good change, B+. Seagate Stormcaller, like, this is part of a cycle of cards like Snapcaster Mage and Jace Vryn's Prodigy and Spellseeker that are like nice blue value creatures usually. And then if you have really broken cards, they just go off the wall. And like, copying a Time Walk or an Ancestral Recall for 2 mana is just ridiculous. So I really like these cards. When you get those busted blue cards, you want to be able to maximize them. And it's sort of fun to be able to like build around them to some extent. So like, Yeah, I think this is a really fun addition and a good card. It's like a genuinely good card, even if you're just copying like a Ponder or a Gitaxian Probe or, Inquisition of Kozilek. That's pretty sweet. And I haven't kicked it too often, but if you can get there, then that's pretty cool. I do in general like cards that scale well. I think Kicker is a great mechanic because it sort of insulates you against having a handful of expensive cards and also insulates you against drawing like one drops in the late game that don't do anything. So I like that change a lot. Sorcerer's Conto was pretty bad. There were some matchups where I bring it in. It was very good against like black discard based strategies, but I think this is an upgrade. It's just Sorcerer's Conto was pretty slow and just not the most powerful. Next, we have Thing in the Ice, which has given way to Thieving Skydiver. And this is a great upgrade. A- in my opinion. Thieving Skydiver is great. This is a very artifact-centric format, as anyone who's seen my videos or just played it much knows. There's all sorts of Moxen, Signets. There's just a lot of stuff. The fact that it can even, like, equip equipments to itself is, like, cute. And I've seen it come up, and that's sort of fun. So definitely a great addition. It's worse than Dak Faden by a lot, but it's still really good. A little annoying that you can't play it for 0 to steal a Mox, but you can just pay 3 and pay 3 mana to get a somewhat uncurved body and like kill one of their lands and get a land of your own. It's really, really good still. So great addition. And Thing in the Ice was pretty weak. It was like okay against some of the like green decks, but just overall not that great of a card. So really, really nice addition here. Next up, Gifts Ungiven was replaced by Mirari Conjecture. And that's a C. Like, I actually think both of these cards are sort of fun. They're both bad in most decks, but occasionally pretty good. And it's sort of fun to be able to build around either of them. Personally, I like Mirari Conjecture a little bit more because it's a little bit more of a control card, which I lend myself towards, and Gifts Ungiven is a little bit more of a combo card. Like the Gifts Unburial Rites combo was sort of bad, but sort of fun to have access to, and Gifts Ungiven Past in Flames is genuinely quite good for people that are inclined towards those sorts of things. Caleb Gannon. But I do think Mirari Conjecture is cool. The third chapter is really good in Storm, and then also just like rebuying a cheap counterspell and then rebuying a Preordain is like a nice 2-for-1 that, then gives you more value on the next turn. So I'm fine with this change. Like, if I had to choose between C- and C+, I would probably pick C-, but I'll give it a C. I think it's pretty neutral. And I guess if you're going to have cards that are similar in power level and fun, like, switching it up is, there's something to be said for that. So, it's all right. Next up, Hypnotic Spectre was replaced by Null Priest of Oblivion. And I'm not a fan of this one, honestly. I'm giving it a D+. Hypnotic Spectre isn't great. Honestly, we're about to get into a lot of black cards that I think are not great. But Hypnotic Spectre was fine. And it's actually really good off of a turn 1 Black Lotus or turn 1 Dark Ritual. Maybe the fast mana gets more credit for that than Hypnotic Spectre, but it's a cool card. It's pretty good in some matchups. It has a lot of history. And Null Priest of Oblivion is just bad, honestly. Like, a 2-1 lifelink menace is like, if they were supporting a legitimate black aggro deck, that could be good, but it doesn't have quite enough support. And so it's just a pretty weak creature with an ability that, like, is okay, but, like, you're not trying to play 6 drops that give you, like, a cheap body in a Reanimator deck. You're trying to be, like, a low-to-the-ground combo deck. So it doesn't play well in mid-range, really. It doesn't play well in Reanimator. Like, I guess it has some value in, like, a Recurring Nightmare deck where you can, like, kick it, bring something back, and then sack it to Recurring Nightmare, bring something else back. But that's still really expensive. I feel like I would rather just play, like, Hardcastle Grave Titan for 6 mana. So, yeah, I just don't think that's a really great card. And again, like, Hypnotic Spectre isn't a card that needs to be in the format, but I think it contributes a little bit more than the Null Priest does. Next up, Vampire Hexmage for Woe Strider. And this is a C-. Again, like, these cards are both pretty bad. I sort of wish they had replaced... I have no qualms with cutting Vampire Hexmage. It's good against Planeswalkers and has some other sort of funny value against stuff like Everflowing Chalice, but it's not great. But Woe Strider is just pretty bad. There's not really a need for a sack outlet. Like, they could have built in some combos with, like, Vizier of Remedies and stuff like that, but they didn't, so there's just not really a need for a sacrifice outlet, and, like, it's just a pretty bad creature on its own. It's really good in other formats. I made a sweet Pioneer video with this card where it was really good, and that was actually one of my worst performing videos, so it was pretty cool. Like, there's some really, really interesting games. Definitely check that out if you haven't seen it already. But it just does not cut it for Vintage Cube. Like, you don't want to be playing 3-2s for 3 with, like, marginal upside. Escape is fine, but, like, I would honestly rather something like Cling to Dust here. Like, card draw is really good in mono black or black decks, and, like, Woe Striders, like, weird mid-range creatures just aren't. I'll pick it sometimes. It's an okay sideboard option, and, like, you know, Esper Control to block against aggressive decks, but it's pretty weak. Next up, another one in the run of mediocre black creatures. Vampire Nighthawk was replaced by Nighthawk Scavenger. The Scavenger is clearly an ode to the Nighthawk, and they're both good cards, again, like really, really good and limited, like, but just not on the power level of Vintage Cube. Like, for 3 mana, you could just be playing, like, an Oko or, like, a 3/3 flyer. It's just, like, come on, Wizards. Like, I don't know. I don't, like, have a specific recommendation for what to put in the slot. Maybe, like, more discard or, like, some form of card draw, but, like, it's just not a good card. And, like, but it is an upgrade. Sorry. It's an upgrade. I give the change a B-. But they're both bad. You're cutting a bad card and adding a slightly less bad card, and, like, I feel like they added a bunch of black cards that aren't good enough in pretty much any deck. So black is still sort of pitch and hold into only Reanimator, and, like, Reanimator's fun, and I like that that's a well-supported archetype. Like, maybe you could even add another Reanimator card of some sort, like another discard outlet, or even another, like, expensive black fatty that is interesting. But, like, come on. Like, Nighthawk Scavenger is just not that good. Continuing the run, worst change ever. Sling Gang Commander came in. It's okay. It's, like, its funniest thing is with Empty the Warrant, you can turn it into, like, an immediate storm wind condition. But it's, again, just pretty bad. Like, 4 mana, you make some 1/1, you can, like, gain some life. That's just so much worse than what almost any other deck is going to be doing for 4 mana. And they cut Ink Eyes, Servant of Oni. That card has been a staple in formats forever. I played that card in my video with Caleb Gannon. It was sweet. Actually a horrible card, but, like, really funny. And, like, I mean, I'm sad to see it go, even though it is quite bad. Like, if you're cutting it for a card that's, like, making a deck way better, or, like, a card that's really interesting, I'll be sad to see the meme die, but I'm okay with it. But instead, they just cut it for Sling Gang, and that's, like, yeah, a bad change. It's not actually enough. D, I guess, maybe D+, but, like, Sling Gang Commander is just bad, and, like, the fact that it's good with, like, Conspicuous Snoop and constructed decks doesn't mean it needs to be in Vintage Cube, in my opinion. Next up, the one, like, black mid-range change that I actually do like a lot. Necrotol was replaced by Phyrexian Rager. Necrotol is fine, but there's a lot of cards that basically do the same thing, and most of them are better than Necrotol. So we don't really need, like, a 5th black end of the battlefield kill a creature thing. I don't know. I think 4th, actually. There's Bone Shredder, Shriekmaw, Ravenous Chupacabra, and this. Yeah. I feel like cutting Necrotol is a good move. And then Phyrexian Rager is actually a really good card. Again, it doesn't really slot well into, like, Reanimator or, like, traditional black decks, but it's, like, very splashable and just, like, a cheap body that plays well with, like, Fallen Shinobi and Recurring Nightmare. So I'm happy to see this card in addition. In general, I think black decks have a lot of cheap interaction and removal, like kill spells and discard spells, and that's pretty bad if you don't have card draw too, because pretty much every other deck has good forms of card advantage. So you need to add some card draw to black, and Phyrexian Rager is a good piece of it. So it's not going to be a high pick. If I ever first pick a Phyrexian Rager, I might just rage quit the draft, but Rager quit, I should say. But it's a good card, and I like having it as a role player and a filler piece that replaces itself and is really good in some matchups. Like, if it can trade with, you know, an opponent like a 2/2 out of a mono red deck, that's a great exchange for you. Although, I guess you do lose life. Speaking of how black needs card draw, one of my least favorite changes, they cut Phyrexian Arena for Midnight Reaper. And again, they like added like half of the support that a bad black, like, aggro mid-range deck would need. They could have really filled this out and given it, like, aggressive 1-drops, and then it would still be a bad deck, but, like, have some potentially interesting things you can do. But instead they gave it, like, just enough that, like, you can really never build a deck around it, even if it would be good if you did get it all. So I just don't understand this change. Phyrexian Arena was a good card in some decks. It meant that you could have, like, a black-red or a black-white control deck that can actually draw cards to keep up with the blue decks. But they just cut, like, one of the best sources of card advantage that was non-blue, and replaced it with a really bad form of card advantage. So I'm pretty upset about this change, frankly. Phyrexian Arena is a card that usually doesn't make the main deck unless you are like really trying to do a non-blue controlling deck that has a lot of black. But Midnight Reaper is just bad, and Phyrexian Arena was, at worst, a great sideboard option, and often a genuinely good source of card advantage. So I'm pretty sad to see that one go. Next up is Buried Alive, which was replaced by Agadeem's Awakening. And overall, I like the addition of these spell lands, but Agadeem's Awakening is the worst by a decent amount, in my opinion. Again, like, that has some reanimator things, but you want to be reanimating expensive cards and cheating on mana to do that. And Agadeem's Awakening is just, like, not really castable. Like, I'll play it over Swamp in almost any deck. I actually think pretty much always you should play any spell land over a land in this format where you only have like 1 or 2 spell lands tops. Like, you don't want to have 10 spell lands, but always play this card in the black deck for sure. But it's just like not great. Like C+ because Buried Alive wasn't great, and I do think these are a good addition, but this is the worst one by a lot in my opinion. Buried Alive was also like not the worst. I mean, it's slow and bad, I guess, but I like Reanimator having as many enablers as possible, and specifically as many tutors as possible. So cutting a tutor, even though it was slow, I don't love it. I sort of wish that they had kept Buried Alive in. I mean, yeah, really it's a C. I'll give that a C. They should have left Buried Alive and cut, like, just not brought in, like, Woe Strider or one of these other creatures, or Null Priest of Oblivion. Next up, Go for the Throat was replaced by Bloodchief's Thirst, and I like this change. I'll give that a B+. The fact that it's like both better early as a cheap removal spell against aggressive decks and better late as a way to deal with Planeswalkers is good. I do actually think in general, there's not quite enough clean answers to Planeswalkers in my opinion, especially in black. Like Murderous Rider is good and honestly criminally underrated. I see that card go very late a lot, and it's really good in blue-black control. But this is a good answer to Planeswalkers that's also like helps you keep up with aggro, so pretty much just a strict upgrade in my opinion. I mean, I guess not being instant is a little bit unfortunate, but I like this change. Even though Go for the Throat was like a solid removal spell. On to some red cards. Bonfire of the Dawn was replaced by Shatterskull Smashing, and that's a good change, B+. Bonfire was never a card I really liked that much. It's pretty bad in red aggressive decks just because, like, in general, miracle cards, this is actually something people don't think about enough with miracle cards. You want to think about what % of the cards you see are your first draw that turn. So, in an aggressive deck that wants to end the game in 4 turns, your goal is to see 3 draw steps. That's not many opportunities for a miracle. So, it's pretty bad in aggressive decks. And then also, on the other end of the spectrum, if you're playing a blue control deck that's drawing a bunch of extra cards, you're actually not getting that many miracle opportunities, unless they're instant speed card draw, like Opt, that draws on your opponent's turn. But, like, miracle cards are horrible with, like, Gitaxian Probe. That just, like, cuts your chance in half of actually getting a miracle it. So, brief aside of miracles there, but, yeah, Bonfire was pretty bad. Shatterskull Smashing is really good. I think it's actually the most hard castable of, like, the fact that you can cast it for, like, 3 or 4 mana makes it very different from all the other spell lands that are much more expensive. So I actually like this edition quite a bit. It's good in mono red for like clearing out some blockers. It's good in blue red control as like a late game board control card. The fact that it can't go to face is a little bit annoying for aggressive decks, but overall good addition. I'm happy to see this one. Next up, Magus of the Moon was replaced by Earthshaker Kenra, and I like this change quite a bit. A-. Magus of the Moon or Magus is just like, not only is it pretty bad, when it's good, it's not good in a fun way. You want to incentivize, like, interesting multicolored decks and, like, man lands and utility lands. Like, I think that's a really fun part of the format that I think should be encouraged. And a card that just, like, shuts all of that down while also being, like, a bad creature, it's just, like, that's not what you come to Vintage Cube for. Like, I know I said earlier that, like, one card totally hosing you is, like, part of the format, but, like, that's not the way. That's not the way I want to be hosed. For drafting discipline and prioritizing getting good mana and like trying to do like an interesting 3-color deck, and then it's like they just play some random 3-drop bear that just like completely destroys me. That just sucks. And then it also sucks if you just have this card and it's like a overcosted 2/2 that doesn't do much. And Earthshaker Kenra's great. Like, you want to have cheap creatures in mono red. Haste is really good. Again, it's a card that scales well in the late game with being able to pay 6 to bring it back. So yeah, I'm really into this change. One of my favorite additions, honestly. And the next one is also a great one. Rampaging Ferocidon has replaced Terror of the Peaks. Terror of the Peaks is a cool card. It's like a really interesting design. I wish it was good, but it's just not good enough for this format. Like, I could imagine it being, it's like probably killer in other limited formats. And like, I sort of want it to be good in like standard and stuff. It's like, it's a cool effect, but you just, like, what deck wants to play 5 mana for a creature, like, that does that sort of thing? Like, it doesn't have that much of an immediate impact. It's overcosted for an aggressive deck and under impact for a control deck. Like, there's some synergies with, like, if you cheat out some fatty, like, I guess it's good with, like, sneak attack, but if you're sneaking in a fatty, you should already be winning, so I'm happy to see this exchange. Rampaging Ferocidon is a really, really good card, and Terror of the Peaks didn't add that much. In general, you're seeing they sort of cut a few just, like, pretty bad, in like, white and red in particular, they cut a few of these just, like, mid-rangey, pretty bad creatures and, like, other cards for, like, lower curve, more aggressive cards, and that's just almost always an upgrade, in my opinion. You want your red and white decks to be low to the ground, you want them to be attacking, and, like, I don't think red and white aggro are so good that we need to, like, worry about nerfing them, so I like those changes. Next up, Luca Coppercoat Outcast was replaced by Experimental Frenzy, and I'll give that one a C. Luca was actually a cool card. It was usually bad, but it was really, really fun if you could make it work, and it had some legitimate value in something like a sneak attack deck that could be like another copy of sneak attack, and you could like sneak away your like young pyromancer and just have nothing between 2 and 10 and like get an Ulamog, and that's cool. Like the red combo-y like big creature decks, now they only have 2 pieces, and Luca was much worse than Through the Breach, which was then much worse than sneak attack, but it's still cool to have that option. So I'm a little sad to see it go, and Experimental Frenzy can be really good, but this is actually another card that like it's really good sometimes, but not really in a way that I like. Maybe this is just because I've been on the wrong end of it more often than the right end, but like, it's a card that can just like single-handedly give you infinite card advantage, such that no opponent could ever keep up with it in some matchups. And like, I mean, I guess that just incentivizes you to be more proactive or something, which is fine, but like, the fact that you could just like have 5 cards in hand, including like a board sweeper, 2 removal spells, and a counter spell, and like blue-white control, and then they just stick an Experimental Frenzy, and it's like impossible to outgrind them, is a little bit, like, I don't love that. Maybe if I always played mono red, I would relish the fear in the control player's eyes, but like, personally, I don't really love it. I'm still giving it a C because like, it can be really good, and like, I guess it's good for red to have that effect, but like, I don't love this change. It's a C in terms of, honestly, it should probably be a C plus in terms of like improving the card quality, but it's a C minus or a D plus in terms of my evaluation, since I like Luca a little more than I should, and I dislike Experimental Frenzy a little more than I should. On to some green cards. Master of the Wild Hunt was replaced by Hex Drinker. And this is a good change. I'll give it a B plus. Hex Drinker is actually amazing. It looks like a 1-drop, and it is, but low-key, it's also like, I mean, you could just drop it late in the game, and it takes over the game. Like, it's almost as good as Progenitus in terms of just being an impossible to interact with game-ending threat. So, really, really strong card, and like, the fact that it is so cheap is just nice. Like, yeah, I like this card quite a bit. Master of the Wild Hunt is a card that is pretty bad. Like, it's sort of a trap. It's the sort of card that like new players can see and be like, whoa, that's so good, and then just like, it actually in practice usually underwhelms. But I'm still a little sad to see it go because it did have some really good applications. The biggest of which was it was a really cool mirror breaker in mono green matchups where like you bring that in, drop it on like turn 3 with a mana dork, and then like just use it to like snipe down their mana development. And like, that's pretty cool and pretty good, and like, it's not broken, but I actually did like that card. I thought it was a little bit underrated, and like, I like having that in the format, but Hex Drinker is definitely an upgrade, so I'm still happy with this overall. B+. Yeah. Next up, another B+. Nissa Vastwood Seer replacing Den Protector. Den Protector was pretty bad. It sort of fits into the like Stormcaller, Spellseeker camp of cards that are like get way better when you have broken cards, which I do like. So there's something to be said for it, but it's just so much worse than Eternal Witness. the fact that, like, it doesn't work well with Green Sun Zenith or Birthing Pod, and, like, it's pretty slow. Like, yeah, I'm not too sad to see this go. Like you do miss the, like, regrowth, like, Ancestral, Den Protector, Eternal Witness, like, Time Walk decks, which, like, yeah, I guess that's sad, but this is really good. And so, yeah, I think there's a positive change. I also do think, in general, like, it's really important to hit great land drops in green decks, and so Finding a Force is really good. And on the topic of hitting land drops, one of my favorite additions in the whole cube, Turn Timber Symbiosis, replace Tooth and Nail. Don't get me wrong, I love Tooth and Nail. I think it's really cool how you can play with Eldrazi. It sort of you can have, like, Tooth and Nail and Channel give you, like, 2 ways to cheat in, like, the really big things. But, so, like, I'm sad to see that go, but the spell half of Turn Timber Symbiosis is similar to Tooth and Nail. Obviously worse, but it's still really good. I mean, it's very, very likely to hit you, like, at least, like, a Prime Time, like a Carnage Tyrant, and, like, sometimes it'll just hit you, like, that Crater Hoof that you need for the win. It's sort of cool that it does introduce a little bit of variance. Like, Tooth and Nail is, like, pretty autopilot usually. Actually, not always. I've had a few cases where it's, like, really interesting if you go for, like, the Sundering Titan or the Blightsteel Colossus. Like, there's interesting decisions sometimes. But, like, it's sort of fun to play Turn Timber Symbiosis and be like, am I going to hit that card I need? Like, I really hope I don't hit a 4/4 elf. And it's just so important to hit land drops in mono green decks. Almost everyone that I see play mono green does not play enough lands. Again, it's sort of like the cutting land for a Mox thing. Like, it doesn't help you to ramp if you then miss land drops. Like, you need to be hitting your land drops and ramping so you can actually play things ahead of curve. And so this card is just absolutely amazing. Like, it being a land that is also a legitimate win condition is just, like, this card is just great. It's so underrated. It's one of my, like, I would probably take most one-drop elves over it, and I would definitely take Crater Hoof over it, and, like, the broken green cards, and even most planeswalkers. But after that list of things, Turn Timber Symbiosis is absolute top tier. Honestly, maybe ahead of most planeswalkers. Like, this card is just great. I love this edition. This is by far the best spell land in this format. And it just fits what Green is trying to do so well. By being, like, mana and a huge dude, it's perfect. Great addition. Next up, Vivian Reed, replaced by Freyalise Lenoir's Fury. This one I'm not as high on. I give this one a D. I really like every color having access to card draw, and Vivian Reed is a really good form of card draw. So, like, yeah, I think that Vivian is honestly one of my favorite green planeswalkers in the format. It's probably worse than this Who Shakes the World. Actually, it's almost definitely worse, usually. But it's really fun and also really good. So I'm very sad to see that go. And Freyalise is, like, okay. They both destroy artifacts and enchantments, so in terms of interaction, they're similar. But Freyalise's plus is quite a bit worse, in my opinion. I mean, ramping is fine, but, like, green already ramps really well, and it does not draw cards well. So I'm sad to see this change. I wish they had left in Vivian. I hope they bring Vivian back. Another Vivian was also cut. Vivian Monsters Advocate was lost to Birthing Pod, and this is another change I don't love. D+. I'm not as upset about this one, but I'm still sad. Vivian Monsters Advocate was really good. Like, it generates a ton of power so quickly. The idea of, like, Trample, Vigilance, Reach counters is interesting and creates a cool decision. A lot of times it doesn't really matter, but sometimes it can. And also sometimes it can, like, significantly down the road, which I think is cool. Like, the bigger the delay between a decision and the payoff from that decision, the harder the decision is. And the harder decisions are, the more interesting they are, in general, I would say. And so I think Vivian was cool. Also, I mean, the tutor thing was just, like, strong, and it's a form of card draw. It incentivizes you for having tons of creatures, so I'm sad to see that one go. Birthing Pod is cool, but it's pretty bad. Like, most green decks want to be playing, like, a bunch of mana development and then a bunch of top end, which is why cards that can act as both, like Green Sun Zenith and Turn Timber Symbiosis, are great. But, like, you don't often have that many, like, 3, 4, 5s that you're that into. I mean, you can build with it. Like, I guess it's cool if you can have, like, Acidic Slime into, like, Prime Time, into, like, it can be good. But, like, it's not great, and I like having a lot of Planeswalkers in green, so I'm sad to see this change. Not a disaster, it's not an F, but D+. Next up, Sphinx's Revelation was replaced by Geist of St. Traft, and this is another one I don't love. D. anyone that knows me knows that I love Sphinx's Revelation. And I do get that, like, a risk you can run into with a lot of these, like, base blue-white control decks is your light on win conditions. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, has this issue sometimes where you just, like, draw a million cards and you're like, wait, I have 5 cards left in my library. They Thoughtseize my one, like, Torrential Gear Hulk. How am I going to win? And so Sphinx's Revelation did give you that problem a little bit, but I just love it. Like, I just like that card so much. And I also think Bant Ramp is one of my favorite decks, where you're ramping into, like, Teferi and Sphinx's Rev, and, like, that's just so cool. Plus, it's rare to pull this off, but once I've gone Channel into Sphinx's Rev, and that's just the absolute dream. Like, obviously, extremely demanding on the mana. You're not playing that early, but it's really, really fun, and so I'm sad to see that card go. Geist of St. Draft is fine. It's just not really what Blue-White's usually trying to do. Like, it's really good in base white if you're, like, splashing blue in a white deck for, like, opposition and time walk. Geist is cool there. I'm happy to see Geist in the format. Maybe it should be a D+, honestly. It should probably be a D+, because Geist is cool, and it's also a great sideboard card in a lot of matchups for control decks. Like, in a control mirror, that card can really take over a game when they cut their board sweepers. But I love Sphinx's Rev. So this is another one where it's like, my vote, based on my preference, is a D. Maybe in terms of actual, like, health for the format, C- or something. But I just love Sphinx's Rev, so sad to see that one go. I will say, all of the other blue-white cards are completely uncuttable, in my opinion. Like, both the Fairies and Fractured Identity are just, like, way, way too good to ever cut. I actually cannot remember what the last blue-white card is right now. I just quickly looked it up. The other Azorius card is Yorion, which isn't great. I mean, I would be okay with cutting Yorion. I actually think it's a really cool addition for, like, Legacy Cube and Modern Cube, because the dream is just to have white be so open that you have, like, all of the white cards and you can just side into, like, a sweet grindy Yorion deck. It's pretty bad in Vintage Cube, though. So I guess I would, like, if it was cutting Yorion for Geist of St. Draft, that is something I'm okay with. I do think it's sort of cool if you can pull off a companion, but either way, I'm sad to see Sphinx's Rev go, so I don't love this change. Next up, Edric, Spymaster of Trest for Prime Speaker Vanifar. It's another Birthing Pod. I give this one a C-. Like, Birthing Pod is probably a little better because it's harder to interact with and you can use it immediately. And also, I actually do like Edric a lot. Like, that's one of the best, like, turn 1 Elf into turn 2 Edric, into turn 3, like, hit for 3, draw 2 cards, and then, like, continue ramping is really sweet. In general, cards that turn your mana elves into legitimate threats, I really like. So that's stuff like Natural Order, Fiend Artisan, which is gone. I'll get to that in a second. And other things like Skull Clamp and Sword of Feast and Famine. Like, I like having stuff like that, and Edric is a good use of that. Prime Speaker Vanifar is also sort of a use for that, but there's not that many 2-drops you really want to be potting into. So, like, I would prefer to keep the Edric, honestly. I'm not super upset with this, which is why it's a C-, not worse, but I would prefer to still have Edric. Next up, Fiend Artisan, right on cue, was cut for Casualties of War, and this is a C. Casualties of War is cool. I like this addition a lot in some decks. I mean, it's sort of hard to make it work. If you have, like, a Sultai control deck, then it can be a really nice, like, late game answer, and to actually get a 5-for-1 is pretty sweet. It also gives, like, Jund or, like, black-green mid-range decks better chance to compete with a card advantage of blue, although losing Friction Arena is a big loss there. So I like this card being in the format, but I actually liked Fiend Artisan a lot. This was another card that I think criminally underrated, was actually really good in mono green. It's another card that could turn those 1-drops into, like, legitimate late-game threats, and then, like, also could just be, like, a beefy creature on its own right. So I like Fiend Artisan. It wasn't essential, so it's not like it's a disaster to lose it. And Casualties of War is cool, so that's why it's a C, but I sort of wish they had cut another card for that. Like, basically all of the black-green hybrid cards are just removal spells now, like Assassin's Trophy, Maelstrom Pulse, Casualties of War, and Pernicious Deed are all, like, they do different things, but they're very similar. Like, they're all just, like, versatile removal spells, basically. And, like, Casualties of War is the coolest because it just is the most, like, I don't know, it just does the most things. So I would like, but I kind of wish they had just kind of like Pernicious Deed for Casualties of War or something instead of the Fiend Artisan. But oh well, still not a bad deal. It's a C. Next up, Tristani Discordant for Gaddock Teague. And this is a great addition. This is another one where, like, Tristani Discordant wasn't completely unplayable. I almost never wanted to main deck it, but it's, like, really good in, like, a Bant control deck out of the sideboard, and, like, it could be really, really funny if you bring it in with, like, I don't know, I mean, just, like, green-white, and, like, they have Treachery or something, and you just can steal your thing back. Like, that is really awesome if you ever get to make that work. Pretty rare, but it is a thing. I actually one time accidentally, I was playing a Bant deck and I forgot that I would not be able to steal their thing, so gave them back a creature that I mind controlled. Whoopsie. But it's pretty bad. It's 5 mana. It's just like not really enough impact for 5 mana. It's the sort of like value creature that looks really good in almost any other format, but just doesn't do enough in Vintage Cube. And Gaddock Teague is great. It's an actual incentive to be green-white, which we sort of needed. Like, I mean, Knight of the Reliquary and Knight of Autumn are both good. Kitchen Finks is, like, honestly pretty bad. And, like, also, you don't even need to be green-white for that. So this is, like, a genuine incentive to build a deck that's, like, actually green-white instead of, like, incidentally has dual lands to play one Knight of the Reliquary or, like, basically mono white with like one green card. Like Gaddock Teague is good. It makes you want to have a somewhat balanced array of like ramp and aggro. Like I like this edition. It's really, really good against some decks. Like mono blue storm. I guess they could have like a blink of an eye or something, but like or into the royal. But like they have a hard time dealing with this. It's a really good card in a lot of matchups. So I think this is a great addition. Green white is honestly probably the most underpowered color combination, and so anything that can make it a little bit more balanced, I support. Next up, a really interesting change in my opinion. Nicol Bolas, Dragon God, was replaced by Omnath, Locus of Creation. And I'm giving this a C because I'm so happy that Omnath is here, and I'm so sad that Nicol Bolas is gone. So I really wish they'd cut something else. I sort of understand it because you can only have so many extremely color-intensive cards, and like, I mean, yeah, I get it, but I love Nicol Bolas. I just think it was so, so fun. There's so many good Grixis Planeswalkers, like, if you can gain like Ashiok's abilities and Duretti's abilities and like Dax Faden's abilities, in addition to just like, you know, Jace the Mind Sculptor or whatever, that's awesome. It's just like great interaction. Like the +1 is just so savage, just like drawing cards and they lose permanence. Like it's just a great card. I love it. It's like hard to cast, obviously, but like it's really fun to have things that really incentivize you to build your deck in that way. So I'm sad to see you go. I'll still play some Grixis Control, I hope. I'll be snapping that Kolaghan's commands, I'm sure, but it's sad to have the sort of cheerleader of the Grixis deck gone. But Omnath is a sweet addition. I've actually been pleasantly surprised with how well this has played for me. I made a couple decks with it now, and it's been strong. It's also been a lot easier to cast than I thought. It's not like I've been like taking its second pick and then building around it either. I found that I've been like playing Blue-Eye Control and then like maybe pick up a couple nice like fetch lands and then like, oh, I can splash this Wrenn and 6, and then all of a sudden like, I guess Wrenn and 6 was a bad example. This Oko. And then it's like, oh, Wrenn and 6, I kind of want to play that, and then boom, like Omnath. It's great. Plays super well with Wrenn and 6, super well with Omnath or with Uro. Like it's just a really cool card. Anything that can just generate a bunch of mana immediately is going to be good a lot of the times. And if you go like Omnath, land, crack it, play some other 4-drop, that's a really, really strong turn. So I like this edition a lot. It's a little hard to cast, and it's not like, it's definitely more of like a standard modern type card than a Vintage Cube card, but it's still good enough for Vintage Cube, and if you can build a mana base to support it, it's really fun. Next up, Sword of War and Peace for Niv Mizzet Reborn, on the topic of crazy multicolored cards. This is a good addition. I do think that, I mean, the swords are fine. It's like, they're really good sometimes, but Sword of War and Peace was not one of the best ones, in my opinion. And, like, you want to be, like, I guess something I've run into a little bit is if you just, like, don't pick up the, like, early Sword of Fire and Ice, and then you, like, get your Stone Forge and you're excited about it, like, losing Sword of War and Peace makes it a little bit less likely that you get, like, a real Stone Forge package. We'll get to some more equipment soon. So I'm sad to see Sword of War and Peace go, but I'm still giving this change a B+ because I love Niv Mizzet Reborn. It's like, yeah, it's just so fun. It's another card that like is really impractical to cast, and like usually if you're only trying to win, it's not going to be the best way to go, but it's really, really fun if you get there, and it can be really strong too if the mana supports it. It's just it draws you a lot of cards and incentivizes fun deck building. So I like this as an addition, even though it's not like always going to be the best card. Next up, another equipment has bitten the dust, Lightning Greaves, and it's been replaced by Lotus Petal. Personally, I'm sad to see this. This is another one where, like, in my book, this is like maybe a C- in terms of the overall format, probably a C+. I actually like Lightning Greaves a lot in like pretty much any aggressive deck. Just like turn 2 Lightning Greaves, turn 3 Goblin Rabblemaster is really, really strong. And then like for the rest of the game, every single creature you have has haste. That's a huge benefit. Also really good with Stoneforge Mystic. Really, really good with Hero of Bladehold, and to a lesser extent Brimaz. So Lightning Greaves was a really good card. And it also, I mean, I like Mono White a lot. I like Stoneforge packages a lot. So I'm a little sad to see it go. I also don't really play Lotus Petal decks that often, but Storm is good when you get everything and almost always bad. So a little bit of love for Storm I'm okay with. Lotus Petal is good there. It's really good with Yawgmoth's Will. And it's also, like, honestly decent in some, like, mono red decks. Just, like, dropping that turn 3 Chandra can make the difference sometimes. I've played Desperate Ritual in mono red decks and liked that. And having access to more of that effect is fine. And again, you know, it's really, actually very, very good in mono black Reanimator, where you can go, like, turn 1, like, Swamp, like before you could go, like, Swamp, Dark Ritual, Entomb, Animate Dead or something. And this just gives you another way to, like, turn 1 or turn 2 something, which is important. Like, those decks really thrive on speed and need to be fast, so I think having, like, a little bit more free mana, it's good. It's Vintage Cube vibes, for sure. And the final change, a third equipment that we've lost, is Sword of Light and Shadow, which was replaced by Gilded Lotus. Sword of Light and Shadow I like a little bit more than Sword of War and Peace usually, although the best Sword of War and Peace can be pretty broken. If you go, like, turn 1, like, land, 1-drop, Black Lotus, Sword of War and Peace, turn 2, equip the sword, and they have, like, 6 cards in hand, that's really good, so that's cool. But overall, I think Sword of Light and Shadow was a little bit better. But it was replaced by Gilded Lotus, which I think is still an upgrade. I'm giving that a C+. Gilded Lotus is cool. It's, like, only a very specific deck wants it, but it enables fun decks. Like, if you have a deck that's playing, like, lots of colors and, like, really expensive spells and, like, potentially, like, Armageddon-type effects, Gilded Lotus can be really good. I mean, just the fact that it comes down and immediately generates 3 mana is pretty awesome. So I like this edition overall. Like, cutting 3 equipment, I support trimming equipment a little bit. And they did cut the worst ones, I think. Like, I would rather lose these 3 than, like, any of the ones that they currently have, which are Skullclamp, Jite, Sword of Fire and Ice, sort of Body and Mind, sort of Feast and Famine, and Batterskull. I guess there's still actually a lot of equipment. And those are all really good equipment. But, like, I kind of wish they left in one of these 3, but all of this changes, like, the cards they're bringing in for them are good. None of these I'm giving below a C, so they're all fine changes. Yeah, Golden Lotus is fun. So, now for the top 3 additions. In number 3, Gaddock Teague. I think this card's great. I mean, I mentioned it before. Like, it incentivizes green-white, which I think is good. Yeah, I'm happy to see it part of the format, and I hope it stays for a while. Next up, in number 2, Skyclave Apparition. Really, really flexible, really powerful. Fits into multiple decks. Just a good addition. I like having this card in the format. And in general, I like removal that can hit non-creatures, and Skyclave Apparition does that. So yeah, overall, I like that card a lot. It's a good addition. And then number 1, my favorite addition. You might be able to guess this from the way I was raving about it earlier, but Turntimber Symbiosis. Great, great card. I'm sorry for all the Tooth and Nail fans out there. I understand. I like that card too. But I think this card is just exactly what green decks want. And every time I put it in a green deck, I've been happy with it. It's just, like, so flexible, and both halves are very strong. I mean, it's like an extra land is really good in green decks. Like, if you, like, yeah, I mean, just drawing that 5th land to hit your Planeswalker is so huge. So the fact that it can be that 5th land and, like, dig you 7 cards deep toward your Haymaker is just awesome. So really, really like this edition a lot. Like, I sort of wish Tooth and Nail was still in the format, but I also think, like, you can't really have Tooth and Nail, Turntimber Symbiosis, Finale of Devastation, and Green Sun Zenith. At a certain point, you need to have, like, more targets. You can't just have like 2 targets and then a bunch of tutors. So I think it's a good change. Even though I'm such a tooth and nail go, I'm really excited to see Turntimber Symbiosis be a part of the format. On to my least favorite cuts. We have in third place, Phyrexian Arena. Talked about this a little bit before, but it's just like, I want Black to be able to draw cards. I really do. And they have a few options. Night's Whisper is pretty good. Phyrexian Rager is a fun addition. I mean, Griselbrand is the grandfather of all card draw and is great, but that's sort of different because it's 8 mana. So I wish that they didn't cut this card. Like, I could imagine a really good black sort of aggro mid-range deck that just has like Phyrexian Arena to back up like early disruption and like creatures that can put a reasonable clock on and like come back from the graveyard. Like, that could become a good deck, maybe. Like, maybe you throw in like Bloodsoaked Champion type cards too, but like that could have been good. And they just cut one of the cards that could really make that tick. So, like, I guess it does overlap with Midnight Reaper a little bit, but it's so much better than the Midnight Reaper. And like, yeah, I wish they didn't cut this card. Number 2, Vivian Reed. Really strong card. It's similar to Phyrexian Arena in that it gives a color that doesn't usually have access to card draw, really good card draw, while also being a good form of interaction. So, like, yeah, I'm sad to see this happen. I really wish Vivian Reed was still in the format, and I hope they bring her back. Finally, number 1, worst cut. Not close, in my opinion. I'm just so upset about this still. You don't have to cut Mystic Confluence. Come on. Like, just program it better. I don't write code really. I do sometimes for work, but like, it can't be that hard. You have like a multi-million-dollar industry with like millions of fans around the world. You could program a card to function properly. And like, yeah, I mean, it's just so good. Like, blue doesn't really need the help. It's like, with or without Mystic Confluence, it's the best card by a wide margin. But Confluence is just so fun, so skill testing, so good. Like, yeah, I'm just really, really sad to see that one go. Again, me giving this a bad rating isn't saying the commitment rate isn't a cool addition. It's good. It's like a draw 7 that also has play in like a mid-range deck or a control deck, so like that's cool. It gives blue removal. Like, it's a fine addition, but did you really have to cut Mystic Confluence? Really? Come on. All right, so there you have it. That is my review of all of the changes. Overall, I would give it a solid B, probably B. Like, if it weren't for all the bad black cards they added, it could be a B+. But, like, that's, like, come on. We don't need to have Null Priest of Oblivion and Woe Strider in the format. But it's still, like, good changes overall. Really good changes for mono white. Pretty good changes for mono red. A couple just, like, marginal upgrades are on the side. So, overall, I'm happy to see this. I think this is a better format than it was before. And I pretty much think every single time they update it, they do improve it, which is cool. So, props to Wizards. They made a few mistakes, but overall it was pretty good. I'm excited to see their next changes. I hope they either lean into the black aggro thing more or cut it. They really need to get rid of this middle ground. But other than that, they did a really good job. And I think it's my favorite format. It already was my favorite format. Still is. But they did manage to make it even better, in my opinion, which I love. And I'm really excited for it to come back. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments again if you think I made any mistakes, or if you'd like to see more videos like this going forward. I could make it a regular thing where every time they release changes, I review them. Or if you think like you would rather me just have recorded a draft or something, that's also fine. Let me know in the comments. I really appreciate the feedback. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with these changes. Really happy that I passed my actuarial exam, and excited to be able to make some more content for y'all. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.